Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at the SAIEE Nuclear Chapter Study Committee on Nuclear Education. Before we start, I'd just like to read a few webinar considerations. Attendees are reminded to ensure the volume is turned up on their device. Ensure you have a stable internet connection. This will ensure the streaming and audio will run smoothly. Attendees can ask questions via the questions panel located within the GoToWebinar control panel. And by default, the control panel is located on the right-hand side of your screen. The chat function is reserved for webinar organizers and panelists to communicate with attendees. Attendees will not be able to chat with each other, however, are encouraged to ask questions. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the SAIEE YouTube channel, the SAIEE TV. The recording will also be made available on the SAIEE website under the Events drop-down menu in the section Past Events and Webinars. This page is updated regularly, so ensure you check back as often as possible for new uploads and subscribe to our YouTube channel. A certificate of attendance will be issued a few weeks after this webinar, once we've received the CPD validation number from EXA. I'd like to introduce you now this morning to the Chairman of the Nuclear Chapter, Professor David Nicholls. Prof. Nicholls was appointed as the Chairperson of the Board of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation in January 2020. Prior to his retirement at the end of December 2018, he was the Chief Nuclear Officer at Eskom. Internationally, Mr. Nicholls was the Chairman of the IAEA Technical Working Group on Light Water Reactors from 2010 to 2016, and is currently the co-chair of the IAEA Technical Working Group on Nuclear Power Plant Operations. He was a member of WANO's post-Fukushima design review team from 2012 to 2018. I hand you now over to the Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Minx. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got 4 good presentations today. I will just ask if people can leave questions. We'll handle the questions at the end of the 4 rather than breaking up the middle of it. So I'd like to introduce our first presenter, and this is Rotondwa Mudau. She studied nuclear physics at Stellenbosch University and obtained an MSc in nuclear physics with particular focus on reactor physics at the University of Johannesburg. Following that, she lectured physics at the University of Johannesburg. She is currently a scientist in the Reactor and Radiation Theory Department at NIASA. Her job is to participate in projects in the field of nuclear reactor physics and radiation transfer. Her particular focus and interest is in neutronics, Monte Carlo methods, and communicated systems used to solve problems in these fields. So with that, I will pass you across to Rotondwa, and later on, and we'll see what she is presenting. So there we are. There's Rotondwa for you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Dave, for the intro. And before I start with my presentation, I would just like to say that I feel that goodness has prevailed in the world. George Floyd's murderers were convicted, so I'm really happy about that. And I'm speaking about it now because I know the scientific community, just like everyone else in the world, was also up in arms with that. And lastly, the Super League, seems like the Super League is not going to happen. So I know that people that are football fans are really happy about that. This morning, I am just responsible for introducing the Nuclear Chapter's Nuclear Education Subcommittee. And I will start by saying that the Nuclear Chapter was established in order to build capacity for developing and integrating South Africa's nuclear science, technology, and engineering capabilities as part of the contribution to the National Development Plan. The mission of the chapter is to promote jobs, spreading information, sharing information through seminars and webinars such as these ones, and to contribute to a sustainable and resilient national economic development. The objectives of the chapters are to develop study groups and subcommittees that are used as vehicles that will drive the vision and the mission of the Nuclear Chapter, and to broaden the umbrella to sister national and international institutes such as SIGRE, IEEE, IAEA, etc. The chapter I'm sorry, I forgot to move my slides. The chapter has been divided into 6 different study groups or subcommittees, and these are as follows. The first one is the Nuclear Science, Engineering and Technology, which is basically just research and development into nuclear phenomena and their applications, such as material analysis and forensics, material processing, equipment inspection, instrumentation, sensors, IoT, etc. The next one is nuclear energy, and this is just continuing support at for continuing in support of Quebec's continued 20-year operations post-2024, applications of standard PWR nuclear power, small modular reactors and distributed electricity generation, etc. There is also nuclear medicine, and this is applications of nuclear science and technology in the field of medicine, such as radioisotope productions, nuclear imaging, therapeutic nuclear medicine, etc. There's also another group which is the nuclear environmental management, and this is just studies into the impact and related management of the environmental effects of nuclear radiation, such as waste management, the impact of radiation on human health for both nuclear reactors and nuclear medicine, as well as the impact on fauna and flora. Then the second last one is the nexus of application, and this is the application of nuclear science and technology in non-direct energy applications with nuclear as a heat source. For example, using nuclear energy for seawater desalination to get fresh water, as well as water purification, wastewater purification using nuclear energy. There's also electric transport, which is just the bulk manufacturing of hydrogen. There's also energy-intensive heating, cooling, and smelting, and this is for mining and mineral resource beneficiation. So these groups were divided. They're different leaders for these groups, and I am part of the nuclear energy subgroup that we are going to be discussing today. And the different groups are organized in such a way that people that are experts in these different fields are the ones that are spearheading these groups. Then the last one is the nuclear education, of which I am a part, and the presenters that are going to follow me. And the mandate of the nuclear energy subcommittee is to promote nuclear training from undergraduate to postgraduate levels. Our job is to work to improve reach and penetration for nuclear education training, as well as to strengthen the national capacity to undertake this training and education. And this will be done through short learning programs and continuous professional development through SAIEE, as well as expanding cross-border education training, globalization, and the internalization of learning and sharing experiences. So without further ado from my side, we're going to have three speakers. The first speaker is going to be Prof. Frik, who's a prof at the Unit of Energy and Technology Systems in the Faculty of Engineering in NWU. And he will basically give a review of nuclear education training and contributions at universities and institutions in South Africa. He will also give an overview of the nuclear training trends in South Africa. He will also briefly discuss the IAEA consolidated report in this talk. After Prof. Frik is going to be Dr. Anthonie Cilliers, who is a professional in nuclear instrumentation and control specialist who currently works as a senior manager at Kairos Power in California. And lastly, Prof. Simon Connell is going to give a little bit more detail on how we plan as a subcommittee to work to create the SLPs, including all the universities in South Africa, and working together in order to hopefully build the Pan-African Virtual University. Thank you very much, and I hope you will enjoy this webinar. Thank you, Dave.
I'm sorry, I hadn't hit the unmute button there. I was being. So thank you very much, Rotondwa. She's done part of my job for me because I was going to present who's going. So the first talk is by Prof. Frik van Niekerk. As Rotondwa said, he's in charge of the Energy and Technology Systems in the Faculty of Engineering at Northwest University since January 2018. He teaches reactor safety at postgraduate level and is a study leader for masters and PhD students in nuclear engineering and nuclear science. He's also contracts director for DSI Hydrogen Infrastructure Centre of Competence, co-hosted by NWU and the CSIR. And he's the director and chief technology officer and chief financial officer of Viridis Ipsum, I hope I pronounced that correctly, a company focusing on green energy solutions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you across to Frik van Niekerk and look forward to his presentation on the current status.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Dave. Good morning, everybody. It is a privilege to be here with you today, although not physically, at least in spirit. I'm going to present these three themes as indicated on the first slide. A brief introduction, an overview of Northwest University's nuclear training. Then something about training trends and training activities in South Africa in terms of nuclear. And then lastly, 2 slides only on the IAEA forthcoming report. So in terms of the first point, a brief intro, something about the nuclear training programs, and then something about a recently added component to that training program. I'm sure this slide I could really do not have to spend too much time on. It was an introductory slide for another presentation, but it captures roughly the, let's say, the core of the nuclear activities in South Africa, being NEXA, Koeberg, Valpits, NNR, and so on. Everything else is just a bit of introduction. I could actually move on. The current nuclear training programs at Northwest University are depicted and summarized in this table, also with some numbers, master's and PhD numbers. As you can see, the whole spectrum from postgraduate diploma, master's, PhD, and then you see the numbers. There seems to have been a bit of a dwindling of numbers across the sector from 2018, but also revival. And I'd like to talk about some of the latter. So the experience and activities at Northwest University from 1999 to 2016 was typically our participation in the PBMR activities, which many of you would know about, the so-called micro model, the high temperature test unit, the high pressure test unit, and quite a number of projects associated with those, including control and so on. Then we have ongoing projects in core competencies, which are primarily focusing on computational methods, neutronics, shielding, thermohydraulics, and some multiphysics work as well. All the above, obviously, in support of master's and PhD studies. So we embarked some time ago. If I say we, I should actually mention Anthonie, Jonamiek, and colleagues. At the time, I was doing other things at the university. But they embarked upon something which I think is very worth a while, namely the IAEA NTM, Nuclear Training Program, which includes also a managerial component. The idea is to managerialize many of the technologists in the sector. And there's a particular reason for that, which I'll come to. So in our case, our plans roughly are to build on our postgrad diploma and in nuclear science and technology, and also on what we've done in terms of the master's and PhD programs. We have had until last year, for 15 years, the DST chair in nuclear engineering. You know that is typically only given for 10 years and in some instances for 15 years. So that is now something of the past, as is the case with all SAIEE chairs after 10 or 15 years. We have a number of short courses. I'll show a snapshot of those. Student numbers are shown again. And then the yellow block is what I'd like to just briefly also add to our portfolio of programs. And for us is to expand international collaboration. So this is just a snapshot of short training programs, short learning programs, and they're typically all at the NQF level 8, and they also roughly a week's lecturing, or let's say 3 to 5 days of lecturing with some self-study and applications and work sessions, all adding up to about 8 exactly 8 module credits. And you can see that this spans quite a number of things from design all the way through to decommissioning and things like that. There are a few more in the pipeline, but these ones are already earmarked for rolling out. Right, so one of the big issues in the nuclear field, as you might know, is that a lot of the cost and time overruns with these projects are not technology driven or technology related. They're primarily people, management, licensing, etc. activities that cause these overruns. You can see in this slide, the picture at the bottom of the screen, the expected construction time and then the final construction times with the delays. And the IAEA identified the human factor, specifically I won't say ineptitude, but let's say lack of focus on managerial project management, a more rigorous approach in terms of the project implementation as one of the key drivers. So why are we embarking on this? We think there's a market in South Africa. We have a long history of nuclear, and we think it's a fantastic training platform. As you saw in the previous slides, NEXA, ESCOM, etc., NNR. Then we are delighted about the no regret option of nuclear, and the fact that we see plans about decommissioning coal and so on. We think that this is part of a study to be announced at the end of this, which we would like your participation on. We think the previous NIASA skills report asked for quite a number of new jobs in various categories. Presumably about 10% or 20% of that could still be valid should this no regret option be pursued. And then we embarked upon a program of revitalizing nuclear training after let's say a few years, the dark years of nuclear prior to let's say 2019, 18, around there, and you know the history around that. So the international industry need is really about the so-called T-shaped leaders to have a breadth of knowledge in nuclear technology management, obviously on top of some depth of knowledge in technical specializations. And this is often the case of seasoned technology managers. So I already spoke to those issues in the general nuclear fraternity worldwide. The complexity of long designs, technical complexity, the commitment. Any country wanting to do nuclear today needs to be able to stomach 100 years of business plan. If you think of the design cycle, the long-term operation, post lifetime expansion, then the final storage and so on. So it's way above the typical 1, 2, 3, 4 terms of political institutions or parties. So you really need to have that kind of depth in society. And then roles and core tasks of the leadership and so on. Many stakeholders are involved, many government authorities involved, and the compliance regime is quite onerous, as you know. Right, so this is a snapshot of our program. It's a postgrad diploma in nuclear technology and management. So, and it's then followed by a master's in engineering and nuclear technology management. And upon obtaining both A and B, we will then grant the endorsement of the IAEA. We were the 4th university to get this accreditation, the first being MEFI. In the UK, it was the big nuclear university. I've got the name for a while. Texas A&M. The following ones was us, and then WITS, and also I believe the University of Tokyo was the next, and so on. So there are about 2 or 3 dozen universities who would like to have the so-called accreditation, and I'll share a few facts in that regard with you. This is actually how it's done. So the language of instruction for this postgrad diploma is English, can be part or full-time. The format is anything from contact to blended to 100% virtual. And then the master's is a full research dissertation. So we're basically abandoning the so-called option B, which was a lot of theory and a mini dissertation. We now have this slightly more onerous pathway to get to the full NTM accreditation. So you can see the presentation mode there is a kick-off, followed by a couple of weeks of a seminar, self-study, and so on. There's a contact week, post-lecture period, and then final assessment. And these blocks basically overlap a little bit, but they cover the year. We find that this mode of presentation bodes well with working staff who are not at campus full-time. And even if you are on campus full-time, this will also work for you, because we focus on one after the other blocks. So this is roughly the timeline of the activity. This approach offers a slightly better flexibility for students. We find an improved throughput and visibility. The program financial sustainability is better. We build a bit of a research pipeline. Someone who's done just a mini dissertation often find it difficult to then enter into a PhD program. And we think all of it makes for a stronger program. So the first intake is this year, and then we got the accreditation last year, which was quite a nice milestone. And thanks again to many of my colleagues, including Anthonie and Niekerk and Johan Frik at the time, Harry Wiegers and so on. So I took up basically the last baton, and it was a privilege to take this to conclusion. Right, so the next point is just briefly about the nuclear training prospects in South Africa. I don't need to elaborate on this slide or elucidate anything. I think you're all familiar with the IRP 2019. Just a few comments. I think there's still too much coal, and these are my private opinions. The research, the renewable energy is less ambitious than the so-called Africa case, which I'll present in a next slide or so. I think we should circumvent any new coal. I think there's insufficient attention to storage. The regulation of renewable energy supplies and so on dampens growth. I think there's been some relaxation recently, but nothing compared to the rest of the world. There still seems to be a total disjunction or disjunct with the integrated energy plan. The IEP is supposed to be updated every year, and it should inform other plans, but it's not happening. The last IEP update was in 2016. And then I feel that in this plan, the nuclear plans are there but vague. I think we as a nuclear fraternity would like to see more commitment there. And I think should coal be de-emphasized and nuclear be emphasized more as a base load prospect for the country, it will be great. Right, just one or two slides on the so-called Africa case. Now, if you look at Africa and you like and at the latest World Energy Outlook and then the Africa Energy Outlook, nuclear doesn't really feature, although we know that many countries have aspirations for nuclear. And secondly, it seems as though Africa has the potential to leapfrog the fossil fuel regime by embracing renewables really massively. And it seems as though there's been more gas in Africa the last 10 years than the rest of the world, which is quite interesting. And then again, I would have liked to see nuclear here, because I do think nuclear is a real option for Africa, and there's a lot of interest. Just wanted to highlight that it doesn't seem to feature in these documents. A very promising fact is, if you look at this study, and I do have the source, I could send that. It was supposed to be on the slide. But if you look at this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the seventh, the lowest point here is nuclear long-term operation. It still beats everything else in terms of LCOE. You can see some of the renewables knocking the same door. Some of the renewables are, according to this study, less expensive than nuclear, but nuclear long-term. That's the regime where Koeberg is entering now with his lifetime expansion. That is really seems to be, nothing beats that. So I think if you compare VRE, not compare, I'm not a proponent of coal, but I am a proponent of nuclear and renewable energy. Now, I think there's a very good storyline between these two energy sources as a combination of base load and variable. So I think one of the big pluses of nuclear training is that it offers deep S&T training, multi-physics, really deep solid training. You could downgrade from a nuclear training platform to any other form actually, but not the other way around. I'm saying this in all modesty, and I think I'm saying it to an audience who would not throw me out. But then in terms of the advantages, I think that we share with VRE This is a LCOE, low cost of energy, low levelized cost of energy. The environmental impact is a great common denominator, and then the initial development needed. There's some common ground there, but I do think that VRE have a few other things up their sleeve that we should capitalize on, and I'll show one or two. We want to be seen, I think, as partners to VRE and not as opponents. So this is a slide that I know that the VRE people like to use, and obviously this is about the total life cycle of supply. If you don't make panels and mills and so on, then you can't really claim these things, but the same goes for nuclear and coal and so on. At least the left bottom slide indicates that nuclear offers more jobs per gigawatt hour than does the fossil fuel regime, and that's a plus point for me. As for the rest, I think we need to take hands and see how we can position ourselves to be part of that rapid growth scenario as a clean long-term source for baseload. The other big thing that we need to see happening will be obviously lots of storage coming into the picture, and that will obviously help renewables a lot. So this is a snapshot of nuclear training programs in South Africa, and this is my first disclaimer. If any colleague feels underrepresented in this slide and the next two, just hang on. I think we have a remedy. This is only based on which is typically in the system, the HEMA system, which is basically only one version of the truth. There are other databases out there, but we need to put everything there. Single version of the truth is where we will get the best data from. So, and you'll see, for example, the University of Pretoria has mechanical engineering degrees up to PhD, obviously, but then they say with thesis in and so on. So we need to take those along. And I think there are other universities who, participants from universities who might feel, look, we are underrepresented. And it's an apology to you, but you know, you will see the outcome. But towards the end of the slide, we are going to work on something which is more representative. The same commentary goes for the next. So please read the rest, the red comment. So the only data that I could lay my hands on, which is from the HEMA system, is the so-called SESAM third order, which calls it specifically nuclear engineering technology, nuclear physics, nuclear medicine, nuclear radiology. Anything else comes through as mechanical engineering or whatever, and please bear with us. So what you see there is based on that third order SESAM category, and it shows the data from 2010 up to 2019. Same comment here, but just broken down into those various categories. The top slide is master's degrees per annum per year, and the bottom one is PhDs. Again, same commentary. Don't worry, we'll sort out that issue. So you can basically see what happened there, and I lumped them together to show the medical radiology in one group, and the other group would be engineering, technology, and physics, nuclear related. You can see roughly the activities there. This is an old slide, obsolete, but I'm offering this slide just to say what one could possibly do is to look at the entire database of masters and PhDs at all universities, and then look for words that has some nuclear in it. This is what I did with this slide way back then, to lump everything to this instance. It was to see who does what in terms of the energy categories. And you can see nuclear is there all over from here. It basically gels with the previous slides. But again, you see some of the problems one has is if you do, one guy does a PhD and the thesis focuses on a heat exchanger in a conventional power plant. The next one focuses on a heat exchanger, for example, in a nuclear power plant. Which one is nuclear, which one is not? So there's a bit of a gray area, and I will ask your input and advice towards the end of the presentation. And this is actually where I'm not at now. We've been asked to participate in a report, Status and Trends in Nuclear Education. It's a worldwide survey, really, and it covers about 20, 30 odd countries, and we did not feature before. This is the kind of information that they're asking: the background of your country's nuclear, etc., current status, workforce, forecasts, educational system, energy education capabilities, examples of, etc. there's a bit of more detail. This is my last slide, and you can quickly glance. And a heads up to all of you, if you would be so kind to assist us, I'm going to send this questionnaire to basically all universities, but at least those that we know definitely does some nuclear training, to assist us in providing the data. And in that exercise, we can rectify the shortcomings, as pointed out, in terms of finding and counting the right degrees and the right categories and so on. So, Chair, with that, I could say thank you very much. And if there are questions, I presume they will come through the chat box. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.
Thank you so much, Friky. I must start by saying that I'm going to put up a little hand and say I lecture nuclear engineering at WITS at a BSc level on a course once a year. So I'm sure there's some nuclear in there, BSc level in WITS that you've missed off, but I'll be cautious before I. But thank you indeed. But I think generally it shows the fact that we are literally desperately short of nuclear training in this country, and it'll be a major challenge as we move into hopefully the near term. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass across. So thank you, Frik. We'll do the questions at the end. I've got a couple of questions outstanding, but I'm going to pass across to one of our expert exports, Anthonie Cilliers, Dr. Cilliers. Known him for how long, Anthonie? Something like 15 years.
Yeah, something like that.
Anthonie used to work with ESCOM, and he went across to and worked with as a link. I mean, you can read his thing, but I'm going to say what I know of him. He worked for ESCOM at University of Northwest, essentially as our link, and later on the University of WITS, as ESCOM's link into the academic world for nuclear activities. He's now gone across to Kairos Power, one of the startups of small modular reactors in the USA. And I will again comment that South Africa has exported an awful lot of expertise into the world's small modular reactor field. I think I'm right in saying, Anthonie, most of your competitors have South Africans running their technical side. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's true. And we've got quite a few South Africans within our company as well.
Yeah, so, you know, PPMR was a major starting point for a lot of the world. And I'm going to digress a little bit before I ask Anthonie to speak. Just to comment that I think we can be quite proud of the fact that the PPMR in many ways was the grandfather of the SMR concept. I remember going to the Vienna, the IAEA in 95 or so with the PPMR project, 100 megawatts electrical then, and being told it couldn't exist because all reactors fed to three groups were large, 1200 megawatts plus, medium as 900 to 1200, and small as 600 to 900. And anything below 600 wasn't a commercial option. So I'm quite proud of South Africa. We pushed this lead forward, and Anthonie was one of those guys doing that. And I'm very glad to see him using his skills in the USA, and I wish him all the best. So with that, I'm going to pass across to Anthonie to make his presentation. So Anthonie, that's going to you. Is it working?
I think so. Yes. Can you see my screen?
Great. Success.
Thank you very much, Dave. And it's good to hear you say these things about the PPMR and all the people that has been produced by that project. And I think that's a big part of what I'm talking about today. I've been asked last year by the African Union to do a bit of a study in my part-time about capacity building in nuclear technology within the African region. I've spent quite a long time within the African region as the IAEA regional coordinator for AfraNest, which is the nuclear education, science and technology leg of the IAEA within Africa. And I've had the privilege of really visiting many African countries, from Nigeria to Zambia, Tanzania, Egypt, all over the place, and looking at what they have to offer in terms of nuclear technology. And it's really amazing to see what is happening in those countries. We don't always recognize the level of expertise that the region of Africa is producing. And I'm going to say this probably a couple of times today, but we always talk about getting education and setting up education in Africa to support the region to an extent that in terms of nuclear, Africa has become an exporter of nuclear skills. And the big reason is because we don't have enough of the industries, but we have really, really strong educational institutions that's providing it. And in many cases, there's also a lot of government support for nuclear education within the region based on policy. And for that reason, the region is growing, but the balance is certainly not there. And that is what we found, and that is what my proposal was to the African Union as well as to the IAEA. It's really to try and support these three legs, government, education sector, and industry in growing that. So I'm going to start by just looking at Africa's development agenda, the aspirations and priorities. This comes from the African Union. It says a prosperous Africa is based on inclusive growth and sustainable growth. We well-educated and skilled citizens for a knowledge of society. And in the nuclear area, we see that emphasis really strong to such an extent that we have to really export these experts, and I'm probably one of them, although I wouldn't admit that. And Africa's development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially women and youth, and caring for children, empowerment of women in all spheres, access to education, training and skills. So you see this emphasis on education and training coming up all the time. Communication, physical and intellectual mobility, integration of robust and sustainable knowledge production systems, to start wealth creation on a knowledge-based economy. And this is almost like, it feels like Africa is discounting its vast resources, natural resources, and trying to focus on a knowledge-based economy, and the disconnect is clearly there. Africa is probably the richest economy in terms of natural resources, as I just mentioned, and as we've seen from Prof. Frik's presentation before. It's definitely has an abundance of skills that's being developed, but there's a disconnect. We don't see Africa really beneficiating its own natural resources. So there's definitely some area of work that still need to be done in that area. The pillars of Africa's development agenda is technical competency, potential of SDI to support socioeconomic growth and development, improving African competitiveness in global and resource innovation, multidisciplinary areas, building a strong science culture, and then of course again the curb the brain drain in Africa. There's a reason why there's a brain drain from Africa. It's because we are educating the people in Africa, and we are training them, and it seems counterintuitive. We're always asking for support from international organizations to develop the skills, but then what do we do with those skills? They end up leaving the country and the region. So it's important for government governance and implementation for that, importance of the role of cooperation in SDI, and agreements within the region. And we see that as well, because in Africa you have these pockets of excellence all over, and it's so important to really use the region first as its source of skills and resources to move forward. I'm introducing a little bit of a path and a process that we followed, and we followed that within Afranest as well. And this is really what I followed in many of the research work that I've done in this area, and that is called the knowledge value chain, where the first stage is to identify the knowledge that is sitting in the country or in the region, And through that, it's important to do a stakeholder analysis. And as I said, the outcome of this is very much counterintuitive. When I visited Nigeria, we found hundreds of organizations within Nigeria that uses nuclear methods for various systems, and all of that is disconnected, and it doesn't find its way back to having the source of skills coming from the universities. So it's really important to understand what your market looks like out there. We often see government policy stating that universities need to be created, and there's a policy behind creating nuclear skills development. But when those students finish, and we've seen a whole lot of PhDs and masters that's been produced in South Africa alone in this area, when those areas finish, where do those people go, and where do they go and work? And I'm willing to bet that at least 50% of them leave the region to find work elsewhere. And then, of course, a knowledge marketplace. That's that cooperation between the different countries, where there's a sharing of skills, sharing of resources, research facilities, and so on, to really fully utilize them. I've seen so many facilities in Africa that's been funded by external groups like the IAEA. It runs for 5 years, and when that 5 years is over, it starts gathering dust and nobody uses it anymore, because the sustainability of these programs are not there and industry is not utilizing it, and that's really important. And that's what the Nuclear Knowledge Management Assist visits are for. So the IAEA has provided really strong support within the region for education. They have these technical cooperation programs. That's really the developing countries are the only beneficiaries of these funds, and they support individual member states by utilizing contributions to the Technical Cooperation Fund, and they provide various supporting systems to the region. The IAEA RAF AFRA program, a need for human capacity building in nuclear science, technology and applications, is identified in the AFRA management is one of the most significant challenges under AFRA. The region strongly depends on educational and training institutions located in other regions and to provide certain skills, but then they also provide their own skills, which is disconnected from what the industry is needing. So this is really important to start balancing this. Once you know what knowledge is out there, the next step in the knowledge value chain is a methodology of preserving that knowledge, and that's a little bit harder to do because obviously the knowledge is within the people, and that's where the National Networks for Nuclear Education, Science and Technology comes in, with the objective to find suitably qualified and experienced nuclear personnel employed by the nuclear science and technology programs in the member state that are predominantly produced by that member state itself. So again, it's important to look at what is the need for the skills when you're providing those skills, and we often see that is not the disconnect is there. An example of after the PBMR in South Africa, when that closed down, there was still a lot of nuclear engineers being produced that's really now feeding the rest of the world, because there was no industry in Africa, in South Africa at least, to take up those skills, and that is really disappointing to see that was really going to waste, because the outcome would ultimately be to strengthen the nuclear science and technology education programs to better meet the future demands in terms of quality, capacity, and relevancy. And once you start having this brain drain or people leaving, it's really hard to stop that, and it's really hard to really get a cohesive system going. Once you have these networks set up where you can actually share the knowledge between different institutions and different areas, that is really where you get into the knowledge sharing space, where you can have now joint university degrees with suitable nuclear content in line with the national and industry needs. And this needs to be flexible. It needs to change with the needs of the region or the country. It's also important to allow for mobility between different countries, to standardize on curriculums across the board, so that if a student is studying in one country, that should still be accepted in other countries in the region as well. Having nuclear reactors, teaching reactors or facilities in operation is really important, and keeping these systems in operation. As I said before, they usually run for 5 years and then they start gathering dust, and it's really important to find a way to commercialize a lot of the skills that's being developed. And I think that's also an area that in the nuclear sector it's particularly hard. I usually also always use the example that if you study in the tech industry, you can start a business in your mom's garage, and you can become a billionaire that way. If you start a business, a nuclear related business in your mom's garage, you'll probably end up in prison, because it's really tough to work in the nuclear industry without pretty strong infrastructure and systems supporting you. And that is some area where I feel that NIASA can really support at least South Africa in terms of finding ways to commercialize the skills before they leave the region. And of course, we've heard about training programs, certificate programs for various groups, produce material and host outreach event. I think nuclear is really presented within the school sector. You always hear about renewable energy being pushed forward as the way to go into the future, and when it comes to nuclear, it's always being mentioned as accidents happening and so on. So this is really important for people to really know what the truth is about energy, and what the real energy sources are. There's a real big drive in Africa for wind and solar, and really, in my view, that is a really good way of keeping Africa in energy poverty, in ensuring that they will never break through. When you look at countries in Europe and California, where I am now, the drive for renewables is strong, and it works to a certain extent, as long as you've got a really strong fossil fuel powered backbone, or something else like nuclear and hydro. So for Africa to go without these sources and jump into solar and wind and trying to mimic countries like Germany or states like California, really will make sure that we never beneficiate our natural resources, and we never use our skills. So that's something that's really close to my heart. So Afranest, over the last 10 years or so, where I've been involved in about half of that time, has provided a really good basis for the education and training area, and sharing of information and materials of nuclear education and training, developing harmonized approaches to education. And we've seen that it really helps when for education systems, but there's still this lack of R&D space, of getting that in the region, or at least getting that to be sustainable, because there's no pull demand from the industry side. This is an interesting one, just emphasizing again what I've said. This is a study we've conducted in South Africa, and we've done similar studies in many other African countries, and the outcome is almost always the same. And this is really the educational capability assessment, self-assessment, where you look at the educational sector and you see what is the areas really that you need to improve upon. So you see the current status on your left-hand side, and then at the bottom, the desired status. And you see everything in this bottom right-hand corner is really the high priority areas that is needed. And you often hear institutions, education institutions, asking for money and asking for grants, but you can see human capital and resource mobilization can always improve, but it's not the absolute high priority areas. The high priority areas are things like job opportunities, recruitment sustainability, social acceptance. So those are the areas that's really important for the nuclear sector to address. And it's, usually outside of the scope of what the universities are actually able to control. It's really hard to get students to study something if they don't see a job on the other side of that studies. And often you see these students studying it because they get grants, and then there's still no job opportunities at the other side, and then they leave the region. So these are the areas that I feel is very much lacking in the region, because there's a disconnect between the educational institutions and what the industry actually needs. So one of the ways to solve this, and this is a project that I've initiated within the IAEA, and you should probably hear about that within the next couple of months. We are in talks with them in getting this going, which is what we call knowledge incubation centers for science, technology, adoption, resourcing, and transfer, and just a fancy name to provide a nice acronym called Kickstart. And this is really to commercialize that knowledge and expertise with the aim to create SMEs and contribute to the nuclear industry. And that's really what, if you look at the successful countries in all energy areas, it's not when government starts big programs. It's usually when there's a critical mass of people working together and starting their own businesses, commercializing their knowledge and skills. And this is an area that we really have to work on within the African region. And that's, like I said, where NIASA can play a big role, because they've got pretty good infrastructure in terms of research facilities, and developing partnerships with the people who have the skills would go a long way in developing this. So again, the IAEA is doing a whole lot of work in support of research, improving livestock productivity in areas, crop nutrition, not always only nuclear energy related or nuclear power related. Some of the best agricultural research work in the world is happening in Africa because of the need for it. The areas that are becoming even more with climate change, more arid, and the need for nuclear technologies in agriculture is really strong. So you can see there's a lot of work that the IAEA is supporting there, but also in the past, it stopped short of really commercializing that technology, and that is a real pity. Also producing a lot of skills in the region, supporting human resource development in nuclear science and technology. 124 candidates were accepted for participation in PhD sandwich fellowship programs to pursue PhD research work in foreign universities within the region, so traveling between different countries within Africa. And to date, 22 PhDs were awarded through that program already. So you can see there's a lot done, but I can tell you that most of that 22 PhDs are not within the region anymore because of that job outlook. Afro regional designated centers provide these facilities for a period of 5 years, where they really provide infrastructure for research, but it stops short of commercializing it, and then it always dies when it's done. And that is really the area that we need to focus on. So the path forward in general, both regional and national technical cooperation support has proven effective in identifying and supporting specific research projects relevant to the region. The projects are often not effective in developing sustainable research capabilities in the regions and member states. And I should add to that, it's not effective in developing commercialized sustainable organizations. In some cases, the project support of the establishment of infrastructure, acquiring research equipment through a once project life cycle is completed, it usually decreases that use. And I've got a couple of examples to show you also what that means. This is just an example of research papers produced in South Africa in the field of nuclear energy, and you can see there's a big peak in 2009, or the peak went up during the period of the PBMR program, and it fell down again after that. And in other areas, there was continual growth in areas like nuclear physics, radiological and ultrasound technology, and radiology and nuclear medicine, because that demand didn't go away when the PBMR was closed. You can see patents, and this is part of the commercialization area. Mostly when patents are registered, there's a commercialization drive behind that. And you can see in South Africa, the green line is the one for patents from outside the region registered in South Africa, and the orange one is within the country. And all these patents that were registered between 2001 and 2008 was on the PBMR technology, and even this one in 2012. But when the PBMR closed down, all the drive for commercialization of any of these technologies went away with it. And that is something that I think we have lost, and we'll probably never get back the field that we've lost, but we can certainly restart that. So really the recommendation was to AFCON and the African Union to utilize the IAEA and Afronest Foundation in education and training to formalize the activities and agenda for development of nuclear research and development at an AU level, and aim to develop integrated sustainable nuclear research and development activities and skills development system throughout the region that suits the region in line with its industries. And as I mentioned, this knowledge marketplace and assessment of what the different regions have will be conducted by the IAEA within the next couple of years to really make sure that they align the skills development with those needs. And with that, I thank you all for listening, and I'll check the chat for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Export Department. I think South Africa can be proud of the PPMR, but unfortunately now it's proud of the fact that it's moved on. So what I'm now going to, and I think that's a really important presentation, because it talks about Africa as a whole, but also it talks about the fundamental driver. And I just will add to this a comment of my own. When the PPMR started up in the 1990s, there was actually no knowledge base in this country of high temperature coated particle fuel driven gas cooled reactors. Didn't exist. And yet within 5 years, we had created that expertise base. And I will just comment strongly that projects generate training much more than training generates projects, in my view. In other words, if there's no project, you can train them. But with that, I'll pass across to Professor Connell. He's a professor of physics at the University of Johannesburg. His research interests include particle physics, nuclear energy, material science, quantum physics, high performance computing, and applied innovation physics. His rating by the NRF has him as considerable international recognition. I know he works a lot with CERN. Whenever there's a question about actual nuclear physics particles, and I don't understand anything below neutrons and electrons and protons, that's where I lose. Quarks and muons and things are beyond me. He's the go-to person on my list of things to go to. So with that, I will pass across to Professor Simon Connell and look to his presentation on where we're trying to take the South African situation. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Dave. Do you see my screen? I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, we're busy. CPD to the, yes.
Yes, okay. So I really want to thank the previous speakers for the fantastic foundation that they have laid. So this is an ambitious undertaking. We want to go all the way from kind of courses that would give at CPD level to this Pan-African Virtual Nuclear University. So let me begin. This is the vision. The vision starts with a roadmap, and it's got milestones on it, and many of these milestones are currently being achieved, as we have heard. So CPD, that's continuous professional development. SLP, that's short learning programs, are not necessarily nationally accredited, but then courses would be accredited, and courses could combine to degrees and then postgraduate research opportunities. And we've just seen that these, in fact, are already existing in Africa, or all of these things. Milestone 1 can be regarded as essentially having been reached, but obviously can be expanded on. Then we want to introduce a model. It's not new. There are examples. I'm going to show you examples, but maybe how we do it will be new. And it's a very inclusive, multi-university, inclusive almost, also of vendors. And we will start small, where things are well developed. Apologies to anyone who's left out here, but from the South African situation, it will be NIASA who will be the hub hosting this, and obviously also with SAIEE, who is hosting this current webinar. Spread to Egypt, spread to others. Ultimately, we want a central cloud installation. Obviously, cloud installation doesn't matter where it is, but there's going to be hardware somewhere, and that will be a virtual hosting of the virtual university. It will live in the cloud. It will be African, Pan-African. Registrations are real. They are not virtual. They happen at particular universities, and then it would be anywhere in Africa. I'll show you how they can participate now. Branding is very, very sensitive, so we pay particular attention to how it will be branded. The central branding you will see is the virtual nuclear university for Africa, but it will be co-branded, and that will enable the inclusivity. And also the financial model, that will be very important. Aspects of the financial model are in fact paved the way for by the Northwest University. And then there will be governance issues, and then ultimately we will have the Pan-African Virtual Nuclear University. And the idea is this will be the educational foundations for nuclear solutions in Africa. Why? Why do we want to do that? Well, we've heard something about that already. We think that nuclear energy and science, there's a plus science there, folks. This is green, sustainable, dispatchable, affordable, safe. It's not only for electricity, there's lots of other things. They center around heat, a high quality heat. Scale, we want to offer solutions that go from SMR to PWR, but in fact, they can go from kilowatts to gigawatts. We also want to look at all the associated science. So you've heard about that as well. The nuclear energy is nuclear science as well. You're going to have other things. And for that, to drive that, we want this massive open online solution. I'm going to tell you about it now. Some more motivation is just to look at this graph from our World in Data that's got energy consumption annually by region. I just want to point out Africa is really down there at the bottom. And then you may think, there's not very many people in Africa, so you must look at the energy per capita. And again, there's parts of Africa that don't even make being colored in here. Otherwise, they are very, very low on this graph. And why is this important? Because if you plot a graph, here it's the one I found on the internet is accredited. They have the level of technology, which obviously will correspond to wealth, is increasing from right to left. Okay, so pay attention that really primitive or hunting or agricultural man was not using very much energy until we come to technological man, could be nowadays person, is using an enormous amount of energy. And so we don't want to only advance by being more efficient or by saving or something like that. We actually want a lot of energy. In fact, you can't have wealth without energy. So how much is that? Africa as a whole has a production capacity of 170 gigawatts. Its population is 1.35 billion. And we just compare that to the United States, and we come to the conclusion that Africa needs 20 times more power. So we need solutions that are capable of delivering in the gigawatt range, but in the short term, we also want to deliver where grids are weak. So that's why we offering SMRs all the way to much larger nuclear installations. So Africa could have a role played by nuclear even right now where there is not a well-developed grid. Obviously, renewables could be there as well. They're welcome, but we are saying that there's clearly a big role for nuclear energy and nuclear science in Africa. And this then is the motivation of our training program. So PA is Pan-African and VNU is the Virtual Nuclear University. And there's a project document already, and it explains all the things that are listed here about the vision and so on. And I'm going to go through these one at a time now. And I just want to recap that the previous presentations, they have established, in particular for South Africa, that we already have a significant training to tertiary level with a national footprint. And also we had a presentation that showed that the IAEA is active in the space with the AFRA instruments, and there's in particular a project called AFRANEST. And it was very nice, Anthonie, to hear that you had visited various countries in Africa and actually seen the well-developed, better than expected nuclear training capacity. So also want to mention, just coming back to South Africa, our own technology base. Okay, there's certain things that should mention is Nexa Temba Labs and the universities, and it represents really a great potential to support Africa's development. And so that's why we can have the vision that we have. And if we are going to a virtual multi-university training platform, just something that for me is very optimistic when I first saw this slide. The picture is 2014. It's the EPFL in Lausanne is offering MOOCs, massive open online courses. And this is one MOOC. Now, they're so massive that the statistics are huge. So the statistical error is small. They are able to accumulate data on registrations and successful completions, okay? This is a particular course that had coming up for 1 million users. And when they plotted a graph where the bubble, pay attention, is a registration per 1,000 internet users. So that means it's comparing the use of the internet for education as compared for whatever else you do with the internet. And the biggest bubbles are in Africa. It's really interesting. It means that Africa is using the internet for education much more than any other continent. And this is something that lets us see, yes, a massive open online course can have some future in Africa. This was before COVID, when such things is much less known. What has happened in the between is COVID has taught us how to teach remotely. Most universities are still teaching remotely right now and finding it more and more successful. So this opens it up in order for us to think about very seriously the virtual African university. And I just want to show you for a moment the World Nuclear University and distinguish it from what we want. Okay, this is a worldwide network. The African Nuclear University would be a participant in this, but we want to do more than deliver short courses, okay? The short courses need actually to end in a degree. A short course could be supplemental as it is for the World Nuclear University, but you will see that we want to evolve our vision in such a way that students get degrees. So we want to formalize it. Then I could mention to you the National Astronomy and Space Science Program. This does offer degrees, honors and MSc in our parlance, NQF 8 and NQF 9 National Qualification Framework shows you it's accredited. Now, it had a rocky start, but by this stage, happily, it's jointly taught. There are several participating universities. Actually, on their website, there's more than just those three that you see. But those three universities by now are on equal footing. So they all get credit for how they participate in the NASP program. And more recently, they can cohabit in the same course together in a coherent and positive way. The way it works is that students have choice and mobility. In that way, it's learned a lot from the Erasmus Mundus program in Europe when the EU was formed, and they needed to benchmark universities to each other within Europe, all the countries, and promote student mobility within Europe and have similar level qualifications. Now, that would be to raise the standard of all teaching to the same common, much higher level. So this is what you want. Students must have mobility and they must have choice. And you'll see how we're going to go about this in a moment. We flesh this out a little bit more, but there will be ways to distinguish, let's say, UCT from NWU for a student. But then they can choose where they want to register. And you can imagine now, it need not be in the geographic location where they reside. That does not have to be the element that makes you choose. And then, very importantly, we have noted its degree bearing. Okay. And now there's another project. The very interesting thing about this one, it's a nanoscience project. Again, it's in South Africa. It had its genesis after the teething problems of the previous one. So it started from the ground up in a more equitable way between the universities. You can see the participating universities there. It's only a MSc, but it's a 2-year MSc. You'll know in South Africa, MSc could be 1 year, so NQF 9, but it starts with coursework, really a lot of coursework, just over a year of coursework to really bring the students up to a rather high level. But when you go to this website, you are astounded at the menu and the breadth of courses, literally spanning biosciences, engineering sciences, material sciences, physical sciences, etc. You are really astounded at the breadth of courses that are offered. The taught venue is at the University of Western Cape, and there's remote teaching as well. By now, there would be much more remote teaching. So this again is different to the African Nuclear University, virtual university, because we're not going to have any one venue singled out, whereas in this case, one venue is singled out. So, however, even though one venue is singled out and students actually have to travel there, they do in fact register at any university. So again, there's choice and mobility and its degree bearing. So now, having showed you that there is some precedent for the kind of things we're talking about, we want to go on to say, what is the precise animal that we are talking about? So it stands to reason now that no university sticks out in the beginning above any other university. So you're going to select your education material from the very best educators. Now, normally that is known, you know, students compare and so on, and it becomes known who are the exceptional educators. And those would be the ones that we would want to yield up the first draft of the educational material. From then on, however, it would be a joint development of educational material. So we want to have the very best educators and the very best educational material. But we want this inclusivity. So we must really attract participation so that there can be multiple universities, and we're going to structure the governance aspects, financial aspects, branding aspects in order to accommodate this inclusivity. And then especially we want external stakeholder partners such as the nuclear vendors. So we will broaden it that it won't only be a university participation, but any kind of institution which can have knowledge, including vendors, can participate, and there will be a mechanism by which their material can also become degree bearing. Okay, so the new model will actually begin by building on the national multi-university training programs that we already see, but we'll tweak the way that they are set up. So students would still register physically at any one of the participating universities, but the tuition is going to be a collective. And then in that way, we build the virtual university concept. So on this slide, I hope it updates as fast as I see it updating. But now I'm looking at a slide about the course material. So there have been benchmarking activities carried out in many countries. And the astounding result of these benchmarking activities comparing universities is the level of agreement about what is core. For example, in nuclear engineering, what should you know as core? Okay, there's substantial agreement not only to what you should know, but also which are the textbooks you should be using. And so we can separate out a core component that you will find it much easier for multiple universities to agree on, and then develop a best practice in that core. And that will be where the main global benchmarking occurs, not only in how material is delivered, but also how it is examined. How do you assess the competence of the student there? Now, in order to move beyond the core, that's where we're going to introduce flexibility. We call it the niche. So a different university will have a different niche area. Then you may find the Northwest University, which has a niche in reactor engineering, in nuclear engineering. That may be one of its niches. It will have other niches. It's also got a niche in the area of waste. And so there could be several niches. And then you may find another university, for example, I could mention WITS, which has a speciality in management and also in radiation protection. May have other niches, don't want to offend anyone, but this is just to illustrate, so that when the core was delivered, it would be followed with a niche component, or the flavor of the core could be given by the niche. And in that way, there will be a commonality, but also a specialization. So let's see what we've got next. Then each country would make sure that the material, once it goes beyond CPD and beyond SLP, when it gets to the module level, it must become accredited. And the ways of accrediting, for example, in South Africa, if you are 50% within an accredited course, the additional 50% is automatically accredited. If it's less than 50%, you specially have to attain accreditation. But we would want the SLP level courses to all evolve to become accredited courses. Then that material would be available to any new university, would be freely available. So if university A, B, C, D developed the material, and then University E expressed an interest to participate, they would have a very low threshold to participation. They can simply inherit the training material, and all they would need to add would be a niche component applicable to how they wanted to develop specific competence at their own university. This is very important, this lowering of the threshold to participation. That's exactly how expansion into Africa is going to occur. So there needs to be a conversation is already started. There's a conversation already with NECSA, SAIEE, AFCON, IAEE, AFRA, AFRANET, vendor conversation, multi-university conversation towards this. So I would say we're at the stage now that we have this conversation and we have the concept document, which I have been outlining. And from there, we want to evolve to the Pan-African program. So players that are involved at the moment are here. The slide could in fact already be updated. We want to recognize especially strong role of the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers Nuclear Chapter and link to the Engineering Council of South Africa through them, and that similar material as in SLPs and courses, degrees in shortened form would be made available as CPDs then managed by SAIEE in the case of South Africa. And then a special role from NECSA, the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation, can perform the national coordination for South Africa. And here I just want to emphasize that it will be broader, okay? We definitely want to see a role specifically in using nuclear energy for process heat, and we also want to look at the medical applications and the safety. So that is our scope, as wide as it can be. And the levels of training material that are now in existence and being further developed, they go, as I say, in this linear progression: continuous professional development, short learning programs, accredit those, they can become N credits at a specific NQF value. M of those short learning programs can be packaged into a degree, flexible content, degree programs, postgraduate training opportunities. And that's the way that we want to do it. So let me leave it there, and it's open now for discussion. Well, I think Dave will open it for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Simon. Absolutely great. We're now finished the four presentations, and really we're into question time. And I see a few questions, I think questions and comments at the moment coming out of the things. I'm looking at the questions coming up, so I'm going to answer one of the. I've got a question actually for each of the presenters, which I'll go through first. Then I'll get to the questions actually in the text. So my question in reverse order of who presented is: so Simon, what's the key next step? What has to happen now to make us move forward?
Well, I know that a formal approach is now sitting on the desk of the NECSA board chair to incorporate NECSA into this project. And the same with the SAIEE, and also this has been reached out to AFCON and others. And so I think we need to jointly develop our concept document and get stakeholders, and then probably something like formalize a committee that will take it forward. Then I would think in South Africa NIASA should do that.
Okay, so you're chucking that question, because for those who missed it, I'm also the chair of NIASA, so it's quite funny. It was a letter I was writing to myself because I wrote from the SAIEE to the chairman of NIASA, so interesting discussion. And I know that will be well received by our technical team at NIASA. So yes, that's the. But I think there were two other key players in this game, and that's why I wanted to bring these two key players in, because I see. And I'll start with Frik. Frik, universities. How are universities going to take to this idea of being involved in almost taking their nuclear courses and making them into one critical mass of nuclear program rather than being purely singular university based?
Well, I think the answer was partially given by the fact that we are one of the nodes in the astronomy nuclear space physics program, and we participated in the UCT node for a long time. Many universities did, and that model wasn't, if I may say so, quite healthy. Now it's more on equal footing, and where the node is actually not that important. It's more an administrative role. The various universities up here in the Gauteng area are part of our node, being UJ, Wits, I think even Pretoria, and so on. And to me, it seems like a happy collaboration where, you know, we are a small family in the nuclear fraternity in South Africa. And if you can actually develop these specialities well, then I think we all stand to benefit from this. The economy of scale is a problem. I mean, nuclear training isn't the money spinner. You better be careful if you want to enter into this regime. Your staff-student ratios and things like that might actually catch you. However, on the other hand, if you do this kind of specialization that we think of, and if we then also expand into Africa, that has immense possibilities. The idea of a non-university carrying the baton for a nuclear training activity at the master's and the PhD level is something that I think might at least come with some frowning upon in some corners, not necessarily from us, but it's not quite precedented, I think, because there's a very particular regime for master's and PhD training. And you may well ask, why NIASA? Why not some other? Why not a university or universities? Why not a nodal university system? Because I think at NIASA currently, the kind of training that we would be looking at would be the neutronics. There's a strength there, and maybe some of the other things. At Northwest, for example, we have a collaborative association, actually an agreement, memorandum of agreement with NIASA, where our students can actually have access to NIASA facilities and vice versa. Some of the staff there are extraordinary appointees. And I think that's another way of doing things, and also to cross-pollinate across the university boundaries. That to me sounds like a very happy medium. But you know, if you look at all the Higher Education Act related issues, to grant those rights to a non-university, I think might be, you know, you will have some issues there, but I think there are workarounds.
I'm going to answer that question because clearly my view is that NIASA is merely a coordination activity. The universities will do the academic stuff, sits the universities. The strength of NIASA, I think, in this discussion, this is my view, and the discussion, clearly we've had discussions prior to this interview, is that there is, and I'm going to use a very nasty comment here because I'm looking carefully at Northwest, UJ, and I suppose I'm Wits partly, but partly UJ, is the egos of universities, which says, I'm not going to be told what to do by another university. And so our view is that the coordination of this could be done through NIASA, who has a mandate to do skills development and things, without NIASA getting involved in the actual academic side of things. It's an organizational activity.
I think there's a catch there, possibly, Dave. In that, sorry, you broke up. I apologize for interrupting. Really, I do. I think the issue is that the coordination, one needs to ask the coordination question. There's a so-called student life cycle. We really track the student activity. That's what universities are geared to do. And then there's obviously the tracking of the teaching material, the practical training, you know, access to organizations like NIASA and so on. So one would have to carefully ask the question: what will NIASA then coordinate? if it's a matter of seeing who's teaching what, it's not really, you don't want to farm out anything which is part of core and happens every day between breakfast and noon, kind of thing. So, but I think I don't want to sound as though I think there are insurmountable issues. I just think we should ask the question, what's value add where, and how can we work together as a happy family? I'm a total sucker for collaboration. I already shared this with Simon, and I think some of the initiatives, Dave, you will recall way back then at PBMR, there was this kind of let's develop universities thing. I think you appointed Johan Slammer at the time to drive this kind of thing, and they developed, let's say, competencies at universities, all post-grad. NNR is looking at something similar right now. They have the idea of developing a hub and spoke model where they would be the hub, the CNSS, Council for Nuclear Safety and Security, and then they would be looking at multiphysics here, neutronics there, thermodynamics there, and the same kind of thing which happened in the military fraternity, by the way back then, where competencies were developed at particular institutions. I think that's a very happy, a very ideal way of collaborating and taking hands. Again, my warning is it's not going to be a money spinner. We're going to scrounge for numbers. It's been like that for a long time, and it will still stay like that. That's why can I just lastly say, in the States, there are 100-odd plus universities which do, let's say, up to the PhD level training. Only a handful of them do nuclear training. Why? There's a reason for that. So, I just want to warn that the numbers are prohibitive.
I'm going to move on a second, but I'll comment that my lecture, the course I lecture at VETS is not a large course, and it gets smaller every year. I can thank certain Anthonie Cilliers for dumping me on that one. So, Anthonie, a question to you with a wider view across Africa. How well do you think? What are the issues that are going to exist, or any problems we're going to have spreading this out into the African community in general?
Well, I want to focus more on. I think you'll be received quite well, and I think there's a real hungriness for this type of collaboration. What I've seen in Africa, and South Africa has in the past been a little bit isolating itself, probably because of its own strength and its own ability to be independent in terms of its educational sector. So I think there's definitely going to be a really strong uptake. What I've seen within the Afronest community is there is maybe a little bit of concern that South Africa is too a bigger player compared to the rest, and that South Africa will basically just take over all of the other institutions, or there will be an outflow of students from this region to South Africa, and South Africa has become kind of like the States has become for South Africa. People move to the States or to Europe from South Africa. A lot of Africans move into South Africa when they move to the next level. So there's definitely that balance that need to be struck. And I really love the approach that Prof Connell was presenting, where that lowering where any university who participates get access to the courses, and I feel it really solves one of those issues that would come up, which say, what does a small institution do? How do they compete? How do they really participate? They may have one or two experts on one particular field, but then they lack the rest, and they don't have that critical mass to really develop. And this really provides that vehicle. So I think you may have to explain it really well at the beginning to make sure that there's no ulterior motives or anything like that, or perceived ulterior motives. But all in all, I think this is going to be received really, really positively. So I'm looking forward to see where that goes.
If I can add, Dave, may I just add, you say I don't see a problem with non-universities having strong participation, because student registration is at a particular university. So the academic home of the course is ultimately a real university. It's virtualized into the cloud. But to introduce the possibility for industry or non-university participants, they can have appointments, they can have co-supervision, and so on, visiting appointments. So universities already have mechanisms to allow a participation within an academic program of non-university participants. But the whole thing is not different to a normal university degree. So I see no problem of NIASA playing a strong role removing the inter-university competition, which you mentioned at the start when you asked me a question. You know, universities normally would want to compete. We allow that with their branding, their niche contribution, and then the role of unifying bodies. Could be AFCON, could be NIASA, could be whatever. These unifying bodies, even the SAIEE, they stand above the universities and let the universities compete. Competition is good, but compete in a healthy way. And then we have other institutions which can manage that and to keep the inclusivity and bring the level of the playing fields everywhere up.
I just want to warn, there are some rules in the system. For example, we cannot grant a mechanical engineering degree in aerospace if we present one course here and the rest is done at WITS. They have a program in that. So let's say the participating idea is there, but the participating organizations are going to have to show that they're sustainable, that the depth, academic quality, blah, 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 the whole thing, the whole enchilada must be covered. That would, in other words, be not be possible, let's say, for small role players, if I say singular academics sitting at institutions, to then allow that university to confer a degree, nuclear degree, a proper nuclear degree. So I think that, but again, Simon, I think that's not the idea. The idea is that institutions who wish to have a sustainable component of nuclear training, I think that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
Yes, but
sorry, Simon?
To grow from there. So I'm thinking, you know, some university that's far-flung and has some capacity, it can see a trajectory where it can grow there. And there are real examples of this, where teaching was done collaboratively, and then ultimately students who graduated from that far-flung university were still resident there, formed the critical mass, and then went forward from there. And that's, we're going to have to help each other like that. And this is a mechanism. And I also think people must have post-COVID eyes, okay? The world is more global, and we don't need to necessarily travel. And so the UNISA suddenly became every university in South Africa, to tell you the truth. And
I will move on from this discussion just to comment that the present chairman of UNISA is a board member of NIASA, just in case you missed that bit of the conversation. So we have connections to UNISA if all else fails.
Right.
I also would make one comment quickly. I don't think that NIASA stands above the universities. I think that NIASA stands beside the universities. Let's be careful about wording here. But I think what is exciting to me is this is trying to link the professional associations like SAIEE, EXA type registration through CPDs into the universities thing, and link it also to the industry. And you mentioned money earlier, Frikkie, and I've got a very simple view of life which says I learned this 20 years ago when I went at a conference where we're discussing research. Actually, it was at the Northwest University up in when it was Northwest, not the university, but changed names, in Mafeking. And I suddenly dawned on me that there's 3 levels of money. Maybe there's 4. The first level of money is what universities have, which is virtually nothing. The second is what state institutes have, like NIASA, which is a bit. And then you get into industry. In that case, it was just ESCOM. And I remember vividly that the discussion of money as an ESCOM manager, as I was then, with the university, was like, this is small change. what they see as big funding. So I think if we can link the funding process as well, where we link the utilities and the vendors who have, the utilities have enormous amounts of money. I mean, you know, Coburg's turnover is a cash turnover of 5 billion rand a year, and its income should be, if it had a commercial PPA, i.e. the PPA for the value of its power in the Western Cape, will be something over twice that. So you've suddenly got an organisation which may have 5 billion rand a year free cash flow, which dwarfs any discussion of, and even Nexa. I mean, Nexa is the same numerical. I've got the same body count now under me in Nexa as I had when I was running Chief Eskom's nuclear team, but the budget for Nexa, the government funding, is a lot smaller than that.
Yeah,
I think that is all the way through the utilities, vendors, professional associations like SAIEE, which is EXA, through to academic, I think is so fundamental to make this work. And I'm going to move on because I think I've got only one question I've seen come up on the question box, just to move away from this discussion, and it's a question I'll try and answer, because it says, are new nuclear reactors not being built in South Africa because there is too much focus on academic research and not enough on implementation, or will more research lead to more implementation? Pardon my dog. And that's from Bruce Munnings. And my comment to that is, I think that's somewhat, I think one, they have to go together to some extent, but basically the new nuclear build is a function of economics and policy and national demand. And I take an extreme couple of comments I'll make just to close this session off, and someone else writes a question. But I see very strongly a fascinating inflection in the world power markets, but it's outside South Africa in some ways, or it's also inside South Africa. Things like Texas crisis, things like Californian load shedding, they're starting to say, and things like the German situation, where yes, they've got lots of renewables, but they're all backed up by lots of, you know, fossil fuels and things, is leading to a re-evaluation of the fundamental science and economics of power generation, and not just the sales pitches. And I think domestically, what's been most fascinating has been the mitigation, mitigation IPP program, which is now causing such a lot of political fuss because of the power ships winning the debate. And what is fascinating about that, besides my dog, and I apologize for my dog's noise. Oh heavens above. The fascinating thing about that is that for the first time, the state went out and said, I want power to meet this operational requirement. It wasn't, I want wind power, I want solar power, I want biogas, I want whatever else I want, or coal. It was, I want to meet the actual needs of society. And everyone is now completely shocked that, with one exception, which is a Saudi Arabian-backed bid, which I think is to some extent, therefore, running at a very interesting commercial basis, the winner, first of all, was power ships using liquefied natural gas. And the second problem was all these prices were above the expected costs of the IRP, because they're also mini IRPs. And I think that's one of the things that's also coming up. People are now saying, oh, we shouldn't have these power ships. But I think people are not asking the question of, but surely if the IRP analysis was correct, then the people who should have won this hands down is the combined renewables with a bit of gas backup. And that has not won the debate. I am going to, pardon me, attempt to quieten my dogs.
We read your lips, Dave.
Yeah. It was a small shout. I have a small collection of dogs, and it's getting bigger again. I'm not quite as much happiness as Prof Connell had earlier, when he was almost falling off his chair laughing before we started the session. There are no more questions in the thing, but my view at the moment in terms of building new reactors is we have made fundamental progress in that the Section 34 determination is now with NIASA, and that should come in the next month or so, I trust, back with an approval, at which point I'm presuming there'll be a request for proposals issued, potentially both for large reactors, potentially, in my view, 2 more machines at Coburg to support the Western Cape, which desperately needs it from a power point of view, and small modular reactors potentially for a program to replace our existing coal fleet, which is really coming to end of its age. So unless I see another comment in my, I think I am going to call this session, I think it's been quite interesting to debate. I think we're looking at a very positive potential in the educational process of creating a virtual university. And don't get excited about the word university, Prof. Niekerk, I was going to say Prof, and I realize there's too many Profs here.
Record's fine.
But I think we've got to look at these problems and address them. We can't just bulldoze them through. But I think that it is fascinating to see the prospect of a connection between the South African Institute of Electrical Engineers, which is the engineering side, the physical OEMs and utilities, linked all the way through to universities, and how do we coordinate that and make it happen? And unless I see more questions in the question block, and I haven't, I'm going to suggest that we call this meeting to a close, if everyone's happy with that. Thank you very much to all the support. I'm afraid Rotondwa hasn't got a camera on her PC, I understand, and I must admit I should have asked her. So Rotondwa, any closing questions from you about this on the discussion today?
Sorry, please may you repeat?
Any closing comments from you? I know that I left you out of the last discussion because you discussed the overall structure, but any last comments from yourself as the vice chair of this study group?
No, not really. Thank you for everyone for attending, and really looking forward to all the work that's going to be put in order to reach our goals.
Okay.
And thank you,
Okay.
Anthonie, for attending, and Prof. Nicholls.
Thank you, ma'am, from my side. And
Thank you.
everybody, it was lovely to see you. You feel like a family, you know?
It is scary how we all go back an awful long way. Too many questions about that discussion. With that, I will close. Thank you, everybody. Please, this will go onto the website, SAIE, as soon as Minx can organize it, and Minx is wonderful. And thank you particularly, Anthonie, for being up at whatever time it's 2 in the morning in the States. You've now got to work. Go back to bed. Hey, go to work. Cheers, guys. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.